Hello, my name is Catherine, and this video is an assignment for the Learning Theory Foundations course at PLNU. I've invited Chris, a neighbor and educator, to help enlighten me on some characteristics she has seen or experienced regarding effective teaching and learning. So Chris, I'd like to thank you for meeting up with me today in the heat and with COVID. We are social distancing. We have masks on. So to start out, how did you get involved in the field of education?
Oh my gosh. Well, I wanted to be a clinical psychologist and I was earning my master's, and there was a wait to get into practicum. So I started taking classes in educational counseling and I liked it, so I graduated from that program. I, I earned my master's and then a credential in school counseling. I always wanted to help kids too. I've always liked kids. Sometimes better than adults. You can edit that.
So where have you worked in your career?
I started off at an elementary school at K through 6th grade, and that was in a south of 8 in a mainly Hispanic neighborhood, and probably 50% of the population was Spanish speaking. And then I went to Race Human Relations, Guidance and Counseling out of central office, and worked with school sites, helping them to identify some of the issues at their school site in terms of human relations and where they needed to grow and what kind of workshops that they felt they needed in order to improve services to kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I also trained guidance aides, and I also, in that department, we developed workshops for teachers. They were all-day workshops in school-wide discipline, working with African-American males, child abuse, school-wide, or classroom management, etc. And then in that department, I also became the director of school attendance for youth, or SAR.
Mm.
And then I went on, I was a head counselor at the school for mostly disabled students, and that was a K through 9th grade. And then I went back to guidance and counseling, and I oversaw a grant for California Healthy Kids, and also the GARREP grant, which was for alcohol education and intervention groups. And also I did the TUPE, the tobacco education, and we did intervention groups at the high schools. And then the end of my career, I returned to a school site at a K through 8 school as a school counselor.
Well, you're hitting all the points that I wanted to ask you about. So but before I forget, I wanted to ask you, so you got your credential in counseling. How is that different from school psychologist, and how does educational psychology, just as a field, play into both of those?
So we start out our program together, school counseling and school psychology. When I earned my degree, we started out, we're in the same cohort, and then we take the same classes, and I forgot at one point we split. And so then the school psychologist takes additional classes for assessments, and then we take more for groups, individual counseling. And the program I was in, we were videotaped offering individual services to students, and then we had a big thing was career and group counseling.
Mm.
So the program, of course, was very different than what you really do on a school site. It was 180 degrees different than when I actually went to a school site. And then I earned my credential, and then I took time off. I had kids and everything, and then I returned. I did go to the school, just San Diego Unified, because this is where I was living many years after I had earned my credential. And so each year the credential program for school counselors is evolving. Like the program that was in the 70s was very different than what was in the 90s. What was offered in the 90s is very different than what the program is now at colleges. So it's been evolving. And when I went through the program, you had 3 domains that you could get your credential in. It could be school counseling, It could be attendance, or it could be behavior intervention.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So again, I don't think they have that now. I don't think they have the 3 branches.
So, I mean, obviously, a school counselor, credentialed counselor is an important part of a professional learning community. And one of our questions or areas we're looking at is how does your pedagogy practice, or how does, what routines and expectations and resources and strategies helps you in that role that you have to support diverse students, a diverse student body, yes.
I feel really blessed that I've always, when I've been at a site, I've always worked at a school with diversity in terms of socioeconomic, race, ethnicity, and language. And so I think that has been a blessing. And I know some people start out their career at one school and they're there 30 years later, and pretty much the same population. And so I feel very lucky, and I sought out those school sites. I think, ask me the question again. I think I got sidetracked here.
Yeah, I just was curious of what kind of pedagogy practice, and I may be not using the terms correctly since I'm new at this, but also like routines, expectations, resources, and strategies supported diverse students' engagement and learning. And what did you see, both in your council role and what you saw the teachers doing?
What I saw was the very successful counselors and teachers, number one, really liked kids. And so with that premise, they had the belief that followed that every child can learn. And then the other thing was, every child can learn, and I'm going to help you if you need it. I'm going to help you do that. So a student who's miserable, is just not doing well in math, the teacher will say, you can do this, and I'm going to help you. Or you have your struggles, or these are the expectations, and I'm going to help you meet those expectations. And I always try to remember, okay, maybe it's not in the pedagogy, but I always try to remember that this student is somebody's daughter, son, is a child of somebody. And that parent wants their child, wants the best. So I think sometimes I've seen in schools that, unfortunately, stressed teachers may look at the home, why the child isn't doing well because of the home life, et cetera, et cetera. And I always had, my belief was, and I would talk to teachers, is like, you know what, but we have them 6 hours a day. Their parents probably don't even see them 6 hours a day.
Mm.
So let's see, what can we do with this child? And the other thing is, children that are really struggling and may be difficult, I would always say to the teachers and administrators, this isn't somebody's kid. The most difficult, the kids who need the most are all our kids. So we're not going to put it just on that teacher, or we're not going to put it just on me as the only counselor.
Mm.
That those kids that have the most needs become everybody's child.
Mm.
And how do we all work together? Because I think teachers, the other belief I have is that teachers want to do a good job, and sometimes I think because of the training I would offer, that teachers would use the tools they had, and sometimes it was only 3 or 4. So it's like if you went to a mechanic and they only had a screwdriver and a wrench, you can have a different outcome on the repair of your car versus a teacher that has, or a mechanic that has 32 tools. And so always being an advocate at school sites or at the district level of training for teachers and giving additional tools.
Hmm.
I also had the belief that every time I went to a training, that I needed to come back and use it immediately.
Hmm.
Either it was I would have a meeting with teachers and say, this is what I learned, or I would offer a half an hour after school, or I would start a group or individual counseling if I learned something in group, counseling or working with students. There was a program we did with short behavior modification program, and coming back immediately and doing whatever it was that I had learned or sharing whatever I learned immediately with the staff. So that it ends up being a community where we're all learning different things, but we're sharing it with each other.
Wow. I think of the to, with, and by, and that sort of explains to me what that means better when you describe that. That you were taught it, and then you're training, or you taught the training yourself, and the teachers went back and immediately did that in the classroom, just like you were doing when you learned it.
Right. And also not having, developing a culture that there's no shame in saying what you don't know. You know, I think that's a huge thing. When I had administrators, working with administrators who would say, it's okay, you don't have to know everything, but let's see what we can do. Can I send you to a workshop, or to the teachers to a workshop? But there's nothing wrong with that, in the sense of I would see when principals would go into a classroom, some teachers would freak out and they'd be calling the union. And then versus having a good administrator where I want you to come in and see what I do, especially as a school counselor. No one sees what you do unless you're in a classroom doing a guidance lesson. And so kind of helping staff to come to that point of like, well, it's an opportunity to show off what you're doing, you know, not to be afraid.
So tell me more about the guidance lessons you did in the classroom. We're looking at these California standards for the teaching profession, and they talk about these interrelated domains, and everything you're describing is included in these domains. Developing as a professional educator, engaging and supporting all students in learning, creating and maintaining an effective environment. It's almost like your role is like the hands-on what a principal should be doing.
And you know, when I would do a teacher training on classroom management, and we did TESSA and JESSA.
What's that?
JESSA is gender bias, and TESSA was ethnicity bias. So it was giving teachers and I believe this, so I did it whenever I did a classroom lesson. So I'm giving you the background to this. So a little thing is, good teachers, teachers want to improve, and some teachers will do anything to improve. So a little example would be, I would be videotaped, or a teacher would be videotaped teaching. And sometimes you don't realize that we have a tendency to teach to the class that's on our right. If you're right-hand dominant, then you tend to teach to that side of the classroom.
That was interesting.
Yeah. If you're left-hand dominant, you teach to that side. And also, we tend to notice when males misbehave 10 times more than if a girl misbehaves. And then the other thing is, when you're being videotyped, you notice like, wait a minute, I was focusing on this kid, but this other kid was misbehaving just as much. So the unconscious kind of bias things, and then learning how to whole class teach, where you're moving all the time, and you I would teach from all four corners of the classroom, so that no one was ever left out. And I also had a better management of the classroom when I did a guidance lesson, because I could see whether are they engaged or not. If a kid wasn't engaged, it wasn't like pointing them out. I would just move to that corner of the classroom. And sometimes just to touch, or I would teach behind a student that wasn't really engaged, and just being behind them, or my hand lightly on their shoulder would bring them around, and it would cut down on classroom issues. So the guidance aid materials I would use was, I did groups with students who had attention deficit, and taught them a skill called STOP. And then I did classroom lessons on managing, at the end of my career, managing anxiety, anger. That was all part of the life skills curriculum, which was